Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Ashley Winstead.
Hey there, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent a few days post-book launch. How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so excited to have you on. This is our second, so by the time this releases, this will be our second released interview, but technically our third recorded because we had to record the first one twice. So I'm happy to have you back on for a second and a half time.
I like it. Second and a half. That's great. Thank you so much for having me. Had a blast talking to you.
I did too. And I'm so excited to talk about this new book. So can you tell the audience a bit about it?
Yes. So in a complete plot twist, my next book after my debut thriller is a romance. And so it's an enemies to lovers and second chance romance. And it follows a woman named Lee Stone, who's 29 years old. She is extremely good at her job, lives in Austin. She's a communications director for a female-led electric vehicle company, like very politically progressive, involved in politics in Texas. And her dream of dreams, because she's such a staunch environmentalist, is to pass a green energy bill. At the start of the book, she finally gets word that the governor of Texas, of all people, is going to put his weight behind this campaign. The only catch is that he wants her to work with his new policy director, a big hotshot lawyer moving back to Texas from California named Ben Latterman. Ben Latterman just so happens to be Lee's ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago, whose life she absolutely ruined in their disastrous breakup. And so now Lee is stuck having to work with her ex-boyfriend. And there's so much, mutual animosity and fraught history if she's going to kind of pass this bill and make history and achieve all of her professional dreams. So shenanigans ensue from there.
Yes, and this is such a fun book. I have been having a great time reading it lately. So what made you want to write like a fun rom-com like this after your debut thriller?
Yeah, I love that question. So as a reader, I just devour across genres. And I really write that way too. Like, I think it's almost arbitrary that my first book that I published was a thriller. If you had asked me a few years ago what kind of writer I was, I probably would have either said a romance writer or even a YA writer. Because I think I mentioned the first time you and I talked that my first book I ever wrote was a contemporary YA fantasy. So I've just been a little bit as a writer in an exploratory mode. I love romance. No matter what genre I write in, my books are always going to feature a really central romance just because I gravitate to that, both as a reader and a writer. So I always had this idea for Fool Me Once in my head. It's kind of been like stuck there percolating for many years. But it wasn't until the pandemic hit when I, like many people, needed more sunshine and happiness and happy endings in my life. And my version of that was not only to read a lot more romance, but I wanted to, live even deeper in a happy world. So I picked up the laptop and really gave this idea that I'd been thinking about for a long time a shot. So that's how I started and just absolutely fell in love with the process of writing a romance, with the happy mindset I lived in for the months I was drafting it, and the differences between the experience of writing a thriller versus a romance.
That is so cool. Would you mind sharing some of those differences?
Yeah. So I wonder, I'll have to ask, a lot of other writers as well, but I completely mentally sink into the space, the tonally the atmosphere of whatever I'm writing. So if I'm writing a really tense thriller, I'm jumpy and kind of in a kind of macabre mood for however many months, half a year that I'm writing it. And when I was writing a romance, it was the complete opposite. It's almost like because you are so fully visualizing the scenes and the world and the characters, you kind of think that way in your everyday life. So I got to live basically in a happy place for a few months. Craft wise, I'm going to go out there and say that writing a romantic comedy was harder for me. And I think is in some ways inherently harder than writing a thriller when it comes to being a commercial fiction writer who wants to hook a reader and keep them engaged. And the reason I think it's harder to write a romantic comedy is because of the like implicit hook and suspense of most thriller premises, which are basically like someone has been murdered or will be murdered, or, it's just like immediately the highest possible stakes you can imagine. Like it's really hard to fumble that ball and make that uninteresting. Mm-hmm. Whereas romance writers are doing almost the exact opposite thing. They're taking something that happens every day that is, on one hand, kind of quotidian, two people meeting and developing feelings for one another. They're taking an ending that's already guaranteed, right? Like the happy ending is part of the romance genre. So every reader who picks it up knows how this story is going to end. And yet they have the same burden of hooking their readers and keeping them engaged. And so all of that just comes down to how skillful they are as writers and how much they can make their readers care about the characters. So it's tougher. Basically.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And like, I personally, I don't read as much romance. But I have been loving this book so much for that exact reason, because like you really hooked in like with the characters and you found ways to kind of up the stakes. I want to talk about that, because one way that you up the stakes in this is having it be the clean energy bill that they're passing. And there's lots of talk about the environment and politics in this. So when did that become an element of this book?
Yeah, I wrote this book in large part based on my experience in politics in Texas. So before I became a full-time writer, actually, while I was writing In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife, I worked at a national philanthropy that is based here in Houston. And I'm going to say this very quickly so no listeners' eyes glaze over, because sometimes when you talk politics, that can just be like, oh gosh. But no, I had a very cool job working behind the scenes as a comms director, much like Lee. Oh, cool. But yeah, and working on tons of campaigns, not just here in Texas where I live, but nationally and in a ton of other states, but working on trying to pass policy, like trying to pass bills. So I had a kind of this like firsthand perspective of what it looks like behind the curtain as bills get made, and basically all the things that Lee and Ben are doing to try to compel and convince important people to vote for their bill was some of the work that I was doing. So, and that included with like climate change bills, green energy bills. So I was pretty knowledgeable about that from my work. Doing what Lee and Ben did. And I just thought that what better locus for tension than trying to pass a clean energy bill in, the biggest oil state ostensibly in the country. It's like such an uphill battle. And I was very, very convinced from my work in politics that there was a lot of comedic value in the shenanigans that happened behind the scenes. I wish I could have inserted real life things that I witnessed people do, because they would be like crazier than what I put in the actual book. So there's like a ton of comedic value, because everyone in politics has giant egos and are doing like hilarious, ridiculous things. And that too, when I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
I've heard of it, but I've not read it yet.
So it's a book that is also, it's a romance that is also set in a political world between like the Prince of England and the son of the female president of the United States. And so it's published post 2016, and it sets up this world where a woman is president of the US. And when I read that book, it was, maybe I read it on a plane actually to Washington, D.C., and it made me cry when I finished it and got to a scene where women in politics were celebrated and lifted up and triumphant. And I sat there and kind of like cried and thought about how powerfully cathartic it was to read in fiction and have something healed in fiction that felt like a wound for me, just based on the politics of the country at the time. And I had always had in my mind that I would love to try to do something similar. You can almost call it political fantasy, but like a kind of the world that Fool Me Once takes place in is a version of Texas where it would be possible, hard, but possible to pass a green energy bill in Texas. And so that's kind of a little political fantasy gift for my fellow people out there, environmentalists fighting the good fight in a state like Texas.
Yes, I love that so much. And like, without giving too much away, but like as they're going around and campaigning and stuff, and like the things that they're saying, it like gave me kind of a hope almost, because I was like, oh yeah, that could work. That could. I feel like there were certain talking points in there that I was like, oh, maybe a world like this could exist, and that was really lovely to read.
That makes me so happy because I basically used to be in charge of writing talking points for campaigns like that. And so I definitely drew on that history.
That really comes across.
Okay. Thank you. That makes me really happy.
So you said that you were kind of had something similar, at least to their jobs in the book. And for you, were there any crazy things that you had to do that you can disclose, because they have to go to all these different cons and fairs, and they have to kind of go all across this state and parade around trying to get these signatures?
Yes. So much of that probably to folks who haven't been working in a campaign, and looking at that process from the outside looking in might seem really strange. Why would you go to a Renaissance festival? Why would you go to a Comic-Con? Why would these be places you go? And that is just one of the biggest eye-opening things for me that I saw a lot was first how much grassroots canvassing is just so important in getting a bill passed. So if you're going to be successful, you actually have to put boots on the ground, your feet on the ground, and go talk to people. And where better than at, these big gatherings where people are coming together. So there's actually a lot of that actually happens when bills are being passed. People in campaigners are always looking for opportunities to go out and meet up with people. Also, it shocked me how important celebrity and optics were to the political process. So there were times, we would get advice from fancy consultant firms that charged an arm and a leg to give us their advice. And they'd say oh, well, all you need to do is just get a few NFL players to come out and talk about your bill and shake some hands. And all of a sudden you'll have everyone on your team. And that was just a consistent message. If Kim Kardashian supports it, or if you can get her to tweet about it, which was always a little bit demoralizing. I'm not going to lie that it so much hinges on that. And there are things that I can't say because people would immediately know what I'm talking about. But essentially, politicians acting like absolute school children, secretly recording each other, blasting those recordings in times and places they shouldn't have been, doing just if I talk too much about it, I will just say like specifics and then get in actual trouble.
But yeah, well, but what you were saying too, like a lot of it comes down to marketing. Sadly, like for better or worse, that a lot of politics comes down to marketing. And I thought it was interesting how that was woven into the book too.
Yeah, there's, without being too spoilery, Ben is able to do something like celebrity / marketing wise that just totally scoops Lee and just causes an immense amount of ire on her behalf because she feels like he's cheated by doing this. And then it leads to what is one of my favorite scenes in the book. Was one of my favorite scenes to write. Which again, this means nothing to people who haven't read it.
It's such a good scene.
Yes, I just like, it makes me laugh. That's the one that makes me laugh every time I go back.
Mm-hmm. So when you're writing, do you ever keep in mind like any like certain tropes or hallmarks of the romance genre? And if so, what are some of your favorites?
Oh, I love this. Love that question. So my ultimate top tier trope is second chance, which is why I wrote one, because there's nothing I love more. I am a fan of tension and angst and banter, and frankly, like, make that banter as sharp as possible, in my personal opinion. You know, like, if we're going to be enemies, let's be enemies, you know? And that's why I like Second Chance so much, because there's nothing spicier or funnier than two people who actually know each other really well, and their like barbs and their banter can really go for the jugular. So I love that about Second Chance, plus the nice stuff about like hope and redemption and love enduring no matter what you do. But I also tried to fill Fool Me Once with some of my other tropes that I love, like forced proximity. Ben and Lee have to work together. There's only one bed.
I was just reading that one.
Yeah.
I was like, when it started to happen, I was like, is she doing it? Is she doing the trope?
Yep. That was so fun. Those are the big ones that are coming to mind. But since I read so much romance, I probably like subconsciously just wove so many into this book. Those are the big ones.
I totally get that. That's awesome. So kind of on that note, were there any like books or movies or any like media in general that influenced the writing process on this?
Music, a lot of music, and thinking about, it's funny because I've had, and I will not share my playlist or anything like that because, you know, or maybe I will on a website, but saying the songs out loud means nothing for people unless I sing it, which I also shouldn't and couldn't
Copyright.
do. Yeah, exactly. For a number of reasons. Talent also, lack of talent. But so I've had this idea in my head for Fool Me Once, and a lot of it was centered around how deeply I wanted to see a character like Lee Stone, aka Stoner, which is her nickname from her friends, like how much I wanted to see a messy, flawed party girl, still very good at her job, and really smart, but like she is messy. I wanted to see a woman like that in romance. So that's been in my head for a long time. And actually movies like Young Adult with Charlize Theron, if you've seen that, or Trainwreck more recently with Amy Schumer, those, especially when Trainwreck came out, I actually thought to myself, oh no, I've been scooped. Like someone has, taken my idea for Fool Me Once, essentially. But Trainwreck is about a woman who doesn't believe in relationships, is committed to not being monogamous, and just likes to party and have a good time. And then she surprises herself by falling in love and has to rethink everything. And so that has a lot of parallels to Fool Me Once. But it's kind of, yeah, media like that where, oh my gosh, and Fleabag. I think that's
I love
probably,
Fleabag so much.
I actually sold Fool Me Once. It was originally titled Stoner, which actually kind of is a little bit like Fleabag, like using that description as the main character's name. But I sold it by comping it to Fleabag, and saying like this book, it's a little zanier, there's differences. It's got a zanier humor, but essentially is about a woman who has a lot of grief and loss that she's dealing with, and she deals with it through humor and, frankly, casual relationships with men. But she's also like got this trajectory of like amazing things she's going to do and healing that she's going to go on. She's going to fall in love. And so I kind of sold it as like season 2 of Fleabag if you wanted a different ending.
Okay. I didn't pick up on that. Like, as I was reading it, I didn't make that connection, but now that you were saying it, I completely see that. And I think that might be part of why I love this book, because it totally has that vibe to it.
Yes. Like I even tried to, first of all, thank you, like highest compliment. Nothing will ever touch the genius of Fleabag, but just to even
Phoebe
be
Waller-Bridge, she's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Even to like orbit in the same orbit, is amazing. But she, I even, when we were talking about the cover for Fool Me Once, I was describing like the Fleabag, that image of her with her watery mascara kind of running down her face, and she's looking at this is like the advertisement for the series, I think. So I was arguing that the cover should look like that, just have like Stoner in some, Lee Stone in some really funny, half serious, half humorous sort of look. They did not go for that idea, obviously, since the cover is like,
it's a very pretty cover, though.
Thank you. I'm sure from all your conversations, and just being inside the publishing industry in a number of ways, how much covers can be battles.
Oh, yeah.
As much as you don't want them to as the author, they are frequently battles. So,
it's the same thing as like genre too and stuff like that. It's every publishing and marketing team wants different things from it, and sometimes the author doesn't want those things, but
yes, it's like, that's exactly right. It's like cover, genre, and actually we had those conversations too about Fool Me Once, like what genre to call it, and title. Those are the 3 like big battles typically between authors and their publishers. I love you, publisher. HarperCollins, Graydon House, you're amazing. But it definitely took us a long time.
Yeah, I can imagine. So kind of pivoting from that, how did you decide to set this book in Texas?
I should maybe not be so honest, but first of all, it's like the only book I've written that I've set in the state where I live. So this is the first book. I'm here in Houston. I've lived in Texas for 12 years now, which is a long time. I guess I'm a Texan. I never expected to be a Texan, but here I am. And yet Fool Me Once is the first book. And so looking around, living here in Houston, looking at Austin, and also looking at Dallas, I'm seeing like very young, hip metropolises. I don't know why I'm using that word. Cities, young, hip cities full of really interesting, artistic, diverse people. And there's just so much energy and life in the cities of Texas, especially a place like Austin, which is where I set Fool Me Once. Like Austin is kind of famously artistic and weird, right? There's that famous phrase, keep Austin weird. And progressive in the middle of a very red state, to go back to the politics of it, but also a state that is like huge and rural. And you've got these like very artsy, young, blue leaning cities. And then they're like little dots in a vast ocean of ranches and more red leaning parts of the state. So there's natural tension in the state of Texas between like, how is this state going to evolve in so many different ways? Like, where is the future of this state going? And I think that just really, really mapped well onto Lee and Ben's journey because they're fighting an uphill battle. And I knew I wanted them to be underdogs in this book, which they totally are from page 1. And so Texas just provided the perfect, realistic setting for like these two kind of younger people battling old ways of doing things and old ways of thinking. And it just felt very natural since it's happening every day in Texas.
That's really cool. Yeah. As I was reading it too, that came across, like it really showed like the dynamics perfectly. And I don't know if it necessarily would have in another state quite as well. This
could not have been set in California or New York, or, I mean, really it'd be like, okay, everyone agrees. If I said it in California, it'd be like, everyone agrees with you, blah, blah, blah.
There's maybe one like senator that doesn't, right. And that's about it.
Exactly. There just wouldn't be that conflict. And this is also kind of my love letter, like I was alluding to earlier, kind of my little love letter to progressives in red states, not just Texas, but kind of all over the country. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Austin is a cool place. And I thought what a dynamic place setting for a romance.
Yeah, I've never been, but someday I would love to go there.
So cool. I love it.
So were there any like Easter eggs or anything you put in as someone who lives in Texas, like writing about Texas?
Ooh, yeah. So I tried to throw a ton of Texanisms. I might be making up a word, but
I like it explains what it says pretty well.
Okay, good. Then we'll add it. I'll petition to add it to the dictionary.
Perfect. I'll sign it.
Yeah. Make a Wikipedia page. That's all we need. So there are lots of little shout outs like the prevalence of taco trucks and breakfast tacos as a way of life, which is a very Texas thing that I'd never like had a breakfast taco before I moved to Texas. And then it became part of my daily life to just be driving down the road, see a truck on the side of the road, pull over, pay like $1 or $2 for a taco and go on my way. So there's that. The Texas Renaissance Festival, I gave a shout out to. One of, if not the biggest Renaissance festivals in the country. A whole chapter takes place there, and it's amazing. I actually
so cool.
Oh, I mean, you really feel like you're stepping back in time when you go. It's like, because it's so vast and they set up I can't imagine the setup. Anyway, it's just so cool. If anyone listening is into Renaissance festivals, like, look this up if you don't already know about it.
It sounds absolutely. I've been to Bristol Renaissance Fair a few times, which is another like huge one. And it's like, they're so cool. So when I was reading that section, I related. So that makes me really happy. I didn't know how much I would love Renaissance festivals until I got to this Texas one. I, in fact, was like a little bit skeptical, like, oh, is this going to be kind of corny, cheesy? No. 100% was into it. Like, and I tried to kind of mirror that in some of Ben and Lee's behavior. Like at first they're there just for their job. And then Ben especially gets very into what they're doing, like the axe throwing and everything. So yeah, there's that. And then because I have worked in politics, everything about the Texas state capitol and that kind of area, all of that is just based on my own experiences and the terrazzo floors and the way that kind of main, like the state capitol is a whispering gallery.
So if you say something, the sound travels across the room.
That's got to be great for politics.
Oh, exactly. I don't know if you've gotten there in the book at that, but it happens kind of later, but it's a kind of pivotal moment. So yeah, lots of little Easter eggs, and then also Easter eggs for future books too.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah. Yep. Just trying to do that.
Well, that is so awesome. I have loved having you on today. This has been great to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Molly. I always have so much fun talking to you.
I do too. I'm glad I got to talk with you again and read this amazing book. I just have one last question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Ooh. Well, I have a thriller coming up in August, which is funny to even say because, we're still in pub week for Fool Me Once, but I have a thriller coming out in August called The Last Housewife. It's a dark academic cult revenge thriller, much darker than In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. So if any listeners are interested in it, I will only say, please consult the content warnings, the trigger warnings that are in the beginning of the book. And then I have, I'm dropping like little hints about this, but I have a sequel to Fool Me Once that'll be out in 2023. And I haven't announced anything yet about that other than it exists and it's coming. So I'm excited.
Well, all of that is so exciting. Everyone be on the lookout for all the new books and all the things happening. I know I will be. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Ashley Winstead.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.